thank you for introducing me. I understand about 1/10 of what he said, but what I understood was good. So especially that about the coffee and about the 2 weeks in Valencia every year. As you can see, the topic of my talk is going to be key issues in research on students' critical reading and learning in a 21st century information society. It's a sort of overview of the field of sourcing and the role of sourcing and source evaluation in reading comprehension and discourse processing. And I will also touch upon our latest work and the work in progress in this area. But I will also give an overview, a sort of big picture in this area, as Lalo just said. So, as I guess that all of you know, the 21st century information society is unprecedented in its demands on students to understand and learn from sources that express conflicting views on controversial issues. For example, consider a student trying to answer the question of whether nuclear power plants are a safe and efficient way to produce electricity, or whether they represent a serious threat to people as well as to the environment. These students can draw on a wealth of information resources available through a variety of print and digital technologies. However, their attempts to provide well-founded answers require that they synthesize or integrate information from source materials expressing diverse and even contradictory viewpoints. Moreover, because the credibility of those sources is often a key issue, students' evaluation of sources become an essential part of their critical reading and learning skills, not least when encountering competing knowledge claims about controversial social scientific issues, for example, issues such as climate change, safety of nuclear power plants, artificial sweeteners, sun exposure and health, which are all issues that we have been using in our own research on these issues. Of note is also that this focus on the importance of critical source evaluation in students' reading and learning brings together perspectives that have largely been isolated in theory and research. That is, theory and research on how consumers of information evaluate the trustworthiness of the sources they encounter on the one hand, and theory and research on learning from textual information on the other. So when social psychologists in the field of persuasion investigate how recipients of persuasive messages evaluate the trustworthiness of information based on source features, for example, author credentials or publisher, they rarely take into account how such evaluation is related to the learning of textual information. And when educational and cognitive psychologists investigate learning from text, they rarely study whether or how readers evaluate the trustworthiness of incoming information. This is not, I'm not talking about you in this group now, but in general. But recent developments, especially in the research on understanding and learning from multiple conflicting texts, suggest that source evaluation and learning from text may be more closely interwoven than traditionally assumed. And although critical reading and learning skills can currently be considered essential, researchers, educators, and policy makers in many countries around the world are now concerned that they are not adequately developed through schooling, and that is not even at the level of secondary education, and maybe not even at the level of post-secondary education. And therefore, it's vital to identify factors that affect how such skills develop, and to design instructional interventions to foster them. And a main assumption is that one viable path to improving students' critical reading and learning is through developing their source evaluation skills. And that is the ability to judge the credibility or trustworthiness of sources by attending to available or accessible information about the source. So in the rest of this talk, I will address advances in this area by focusing on aspects of student source evaluation during reading to learn about controversial issues, and how this may vary with individual and textual factors. I will also address how source evaluation skills may be promoted through systematic instruction and the potential effects of such instruction on students' learning outcomes. By targeting reading to learn about controversial socio-scientific issues, such as whether sun exposure is healthy or harmful, or the safety of nuclear power plants, this presentation also addresses important aspects of science literacy. Several science education researchers highlight the challenges for students to critically evaluate and learn from popular media reports of science, especially when they deal with ill-structured problems in the form of controversial socio-scientific issues. And this is our working definition of sourcing. We think about sourcing as involving attending to, evaluating, and using available or accessible information about the sources of documents. For example, about who authored them or what types of documents they are. Okay, and I can see here, you can see here that I cite a recent chapter that I had the pleasure to author together with Lalo Salmeron and Mark Stadtler. It is an invited chapter for the second edition of the Handbook of Discourse Processes. And I think that this is probably the more comprehensive treatment of the role of sourcing in reading comprehension and discourse processing so far. This is the Bråten, Stadtler and Salmeron 216 reference. Okay, a common theoretical framework in this area of research is the documents model framework of Britt, Rouet and colleagues, and many of you will know this framework already. In essence, this framework explains how good readers and learners deal with multiple textual sources presenting different or conflicting views on the same issue by constructing integrated mental representations of the issue and at the same time keeping track of the sources associated with different pieces of information. That is, who said what. And according to this documents model framework, it's crucial to attend to, evaluate, and at times also remember the sources of different pieces of information, because the tagging of information about the sources themselves, for example, the author or the publisher, to different perspectives on the issue allows readers to consider the trustworthiness of the information in light of the features of the sources. And in turn, the perceived trustworthiness of information may influence the weight and position that the information is assigned in learners' overall representations of the issue. This means, for example, that subordinating or devaluing information from incompetent, discredited, or strongly biased sources, and at the same time giving prominence to information from more trustworthy sources, will likely result in a more appropriate, higher quality mental representation of the issue. So it's the main assumption of the documents model framework that effective learning about a controversial issue requires a consideration of available source feature information in addition to a consideration of the content information offered by multiple documents. One recent elaboration of the documents model framework emphasizes the need to pay attention to sources cited or embedded within texts, in addition to the sources of separate text, which we call the main sources. This suggests that good learners may link content information to source information presented within a text, for example, a cited author, and embed this source information within the source of the text itself. For example, attribute particular content information to a particular author cited by a particular publication. The importance of contextualizing embedded sources and the messages within the main sources may be illustrated by a situation where people read to inform themselves about controversial issues, such as whether artificial sweeteners may pose any health risks in order to make behavioral decisions. Should I reduce my intake of artificial sweeteners, for instance? In such a situation, noting and remembering whether a message by a nutritionist stating that all thoughts of health risk could be discarded whether this message is included in a document published by a large brewery or in a document published by the National Food Safety Authority, may help consumers evaluate the trustworthiness of the embedded source and the message it conveys. Representing embedded sources as a second layer of source information is a great challenge to many students, however. I'll come back a little bit to this issue later. And now I will give a very brief overview of empirical work in this area. Many students now show that students, even at secondary, and as I said, even at post-secondary levels, they do not attend to source features. For example, authors, type of publication, publication venue, and place and date of creation of a document, in order to evaluate for trustworthiness when they are reading multiple texts to learn about controversial issues. Research suggests that such lack of source feature consideration to establish trustworthiness has consequences for effectiveness and efficiency when acquiring new knowledge. Of note is also that scholars particularly interested in digital media technologies, especially with respect to the internet, have given the issue of trustworthiness of sources and information particular attention in the last decade. One reason is that professional gatekeeping is essentially lacking on the web, with posted texts seldom having explicit review policies or undergoing the quality control most paper-based publications do. Thus, judgment of trustworthiness are more often left with the individual learners or information consumers themselves. The challenges increase because the author and source feature information that is typically available in printed text is often masked, is often unavailable, or at best is hard to interpret on many websites. And a particular challenge noted in our work seems to be that the students may link content information to sources cited in a text without embedding this source information within information about the source of the text itself. And this involves a decontextualization of the content information that makes it harder to evaluate. It may be essential to note, for example, whether a particular scientist making a particular claim is cited in a scientific journal or in a tabloid. For example, in a recent study, Helge Strømsø and I documented that when students paid attention to embedded sources during reading, in more than 80% of the instances, they later referred to information about embedded sources independent of the sources in which they were embedded. This led, for example, a student to cite the prestigious journals Nature and Science without taking into consideration that those sources were embedded in a very subjective magazine article presenting strong one-sided claims on the issue without much evidence. So this is a challenge in this area. But as problematic and challenging as source evaluation may be for students across educational levels, several correlational studies have shown students' consideration of trustworthiness based on source features to be linked to the learning about controversial issues from diverse texts. For example, in our 2009 study, which is cited on this slide, we demonstrated a relationship between students' judgments of the trustworthiness of texts on global warming based on the respective source features and the learning from the texts. In that study, results indicated that trust in reliable sources indeed seems to matter, even if learners are not necessarily able to justify their trust in terms of relevant source features, such as document type and publisher. If they are, such justifications may represent a level of saying is that even if learners is not necessarily able to justify their trust in terms of relevant source features such as document type and publishers, trusting reliable sources seem to matter when learning from multiple documents. But if they, in addition, are able to justify their trust by referring to relevant source features, such justifications may represent a level of sourcing skills capable of boosting performance even further. And there are also recent studies using think-aloud methodologies that demonstrate that strategies focused on differentiating more versus less useful text during reading and using trustworthiness criteria when doing so relate to better learning. For example, in two of those studies cited on this slide, the Rouet et al. Study and the Barzilai study, the 2015 study, they also showed that they had also had students read multiple texts about controversial socio-scientific issues. The first was cell phone radiation and the other was desalination. And they demonstrated relationships between attention to and evaluation of information sources during reading and argumentation and source use in post-reading essays. And in the same vein, Goldman et al. In the 2012 study, who contrasted the kinds of processing that better and poorer learners display during reading more or less reliable text on the complex scientific issues, that was on volcanoes. They found that better learners were more likely to evaluate the source credibility of texts compared with poorer learners. And also related to this finding, poorer learners spent more time reading unreliable texts and were also more likely to include erroneous concepts in post-reading essays. So in brief, the correlational research suggests that to successfully construct complete, accurate mental representations of controversial issues that can be applied in novel situations, be involved in argumentative reasoning, and form the basis of important behavioral decisions, students must apply more sophisticated source evaluation strategies in efforts to selectively process higher quality information. And before turning to intervention work, which is indeed needed to draw stronger conclusions concerning causal relationships between student source evaluation skills and the learning and comprehension performance, I will also say something about the roles of individual and textual factors in source evaluation. So, although much remains to be known about individual factors associated with source evaluation, there is currently evidence suggesting that students' working memory capacity, as well as their prior knowledge about the issue, are positively correlated with critical evaluation of sources when reading about controversial issues. And also, students' implicit theories of intelligence, the degree to which they consider their own intelligence to be malleable rather than fixed, have recently been linked to source evaluation. And other individual difference variables that have been linked to source evaluation include beliefs about knowledge and knowing concerning a particular domain or issue. For example, beliefs about the certainty or simplicity of knowledge or the justification of knowing. For example, in the Strømsø et al. 2011 study cited here, it was suggested that students believing knowledge about an issue to be complex may be less likely to rely on information from sources that often simplify rather than elaborate upon complex issues, such as a newspaper. And additionally, it was found in this study that the belief that justification for knowing should refer to reasoning, scientific inquiry, and the evaluation and integration of multiple sources was linked to students' trust in research-based sources and attention to a variety of source features when evaluating such sources on the issue of global warming. And finally, there is some evidence to suggest that students' prior attitudes and motivations play a role in situations that require critical evaluation of source information. For example, in the Braasch et al. 2014 studies cited in the last bullet point, it was found that when reading inaccurate arguments about controversial health-related issues, students remember the sources of those arguments better the stronger their prior beliefs about the issues. And regarding motivation, in the Strømsø et al. 2010 study, it was found that students' topic interest was positively related to their memory for source information when reading multiple texts about global warming. And more recently, Rune Andreasen and I showed that learners' source evaluation self-efficacy, that is their perceived capability to evaluate the trustworthiness of sources, predicted their reliance on relevant source features related to both the product and the producer of websites when evaluating their trustworthiness. However, not only individual but also textual factors have been shown to play a role in source evaluation. Braasch et al. Launched the idea that learners' attention to source information, that is to who said what, might increase when different sources provide discrepant accounts. More specifically, these authors proposed that when different sources make conflicting claims about a controversial situation or issue, one mechanism for resolving the resulting break in situational coherence and constructing an integrated mental representation may be to link discrepant content information to the respective sources. They refer to this assumption as the discrepancy-induced source comprehension assumption. And after this very seminal study that was out in Journal of Memory and Cognition in 2012, where they provided preliminary evidence, it has been supported in a number of later studies where the conflicting claims and the respective sources have been embedded in a single text, as well as in studies where conflicting claims about the same issue are presented in multiple distinct texts. In a recent study published in Discourse Processing in 2014, for example, Mark Stadtler, Lisa Scharrer et al., they found that when the existence of conflicting claims across multiple texts was explicitly signaled through rhetorical means, for example by starting a text with the following phrase, contrary to what some health professionals argue, then students included more source citations when generating essay responses on the issue than when conflicts were not explicitly signaled. But recently, researchers interested in source evaluation in students' critical reading and learning have also provided evidence that individual factors may interact with text factors in both single and multiple text contexts. For example, in a recent paper, Johanna Meyer and Tobias Richter presented findings consistent with the idea that a discrepancy between students' prior beliefs or attitudes regarding controversial issues and the textual information may trigger attention to the source of a text. Thus, when students read two texts conflicting and two texts consistent with their prior beliefs on the topics of global warming or vaccination, these authors found that students displayed better source memory for text presenting arguments in conflict with their prior beliefs. In a single text study, Lalo, Helge, and I built on the Pereira et al.'s extension of the DISC model to situations involving discrepancies between learners' prior knowledge or beliefs and textual information, showing that students' memory for source information may increase with the discrepancy between textual claims and prior beliefs. Students that read a claim discrepant with the prior beliefs may take a second look at the source and say, who said that? Or maybe even, who the hell said that? Finally, in a multiple text study, Barzilai and Eset Alkalai, they found that conflicts between sources improved attention to and memory for who said what, only among readers with higher levels of multiplist and evaluativist epistemic thinking. So there may be interactions here between. And this study by Gottlieb and Weinberg is the study I just I talked about in the break as involving the values of readers, and also show an interaction between the values of readers and the text content. Because research suggests a general lack of consideration of the importance of available source features among students, and because source feature evaluation seems tantamount when reading to learn about controversial issues in diverse texts, students appear to require interventions targeting the acquisition of source feature evaluation strategies. And accordingly, some researchers have developed interventions for elementary, secondary, or post-secondary students, as well as for adults out of school, to improve their consideration of source features when working with multiple text. And quite a few of those studies are cited on this slide, and this area is increasing. Here are some recent studies. I would say some Britt and Glinska studies from 2002, published in Cognition and Instruction. It's already become a classic study in this area because this is a new area. And some more recent studies, the Jenny Wiley et al. Study for 2009 in the American Educational Research Journal, and also the study that we did with Jason Braasch in Oslo, published in Contemporary EdPsych in 2013. I will not be able to go more in detail into those studies because of time issues. But these are all those three, I would say, even I'm a co-author on the last one, are important studies in this area. Relevant and credible studies. I would just say something about what I think are important future directions in this area. Students at various educational levels are increasingly confronted with more and less reliable texts on unsettled and controversial issues, both inside and outside of classroom contexts. Further advancement of our understanding of critical source feature evaluation and its relation to learning processes and learning outcomes is therefore needed. Such understanding may in turn provide a basis for theory-based educational innovations in the area. And so what I will do now finally is to briefly present three future goals for research on student source evaluation skills that I think are likely to have important theoretical as well as educational implications. The first goal, in my opinion, would be to further investigate individual and textual factors contributing to student source evaluation when they read to inform themselves about controversial socio-scientific issues. So far, we have only limited knowledge of how students' cognitions, beliefs, attitudes, motivations, maybe also values, may contribute to the source evaluation in scientific text contexts. And even less is known about how such individual difference variables may be interrelated. One way to fill this knowledge gap is therefore to include such variables in the same study to examine how they separately and in concert may contribute to students' source evaluation practices. In addition, aspects of the textual materials need to be further investigated to better understand how textual factors may contribute to source evaluation differences. For example, the extent to which the presentation of conflicting views and the source that convey them in multiple texts with cross-references to the sources of the other texts, rather than in multiple texts without such cross-references or in one single text, may influence student source evaluation practices is currently not well understood. We are actually currently investigating this very issue in our ongoing project, where we have created three different conditions. In one condition, sources and different perspectives are embedded in are presented in one text. In another condition, across four different texts, and in the third condition, in four different texts, but with cross-references included in the four texts. And moreover, further investigated interaction effects of individual difference variable with textual factors on student source evaluation would also break new empirical territory and contribute to our theoretical understanding of source evaluation in student readers. For example, may effect of individual differences in prior topic knowledge or epistemic beliefs on source evaluation be moderated by explicit cross-referencing in multiple conflicting texts? This is also a question that we are trying to answer in our current project. We have prepared all this material. We are collecting the data on March 13, I think. A second goal is to more closely examine students' understanding of the distinction between content relevance and source trustworthiness, as well as their ability to flexibly balance those criteria when selecting, processing, and using information resources on controversial issues in inquiry contexts. When we addressed this issue in a recent mixed method study together with McCrudden, we asked 150 high school students to select information resources varying with respect to both content relevance and source credibility to complete a particular task. The task was to prepare a class presentation on a controversial socio-scientific topic. The results indicated that the extent to which students distinguished between and took the two constructs, that is content relevance and source credibility, into consideration when selecting documents was context dependent, in the sense that it varied with the familiarity of the topic. Thus, content relevance was equally valued and highly salient to students for both a more familiar and a less familiar topic, such that they clearly selected more relevant and less relevant content for both. However, the same students distinguished much less between high and low author expertise when selected documents for the more familiar topic than when they selected documents for the less familiar topic, with the salience of content relevance seemingly overshadowing the salience of author expertise in the former case. This study is just out in the Journal of Education and Psychology. We are following up this study just now. I'm actually writing up this study during my weeks in Valencia just now. We have collected in this follow-up study data from 200 second and third year upper secondary students. And we are studying not only selection of documents, but also processing and use of documents for a particular purpose. And the purpose in this case is writing a letter to the editor on one or two controversial socio-scientific issues. We use the same two issues that we used in this 2016 Journal of EdSci study: safety of nuclear power plants, which is the less familiar study, and the human-induced climate change, which is the more familiar study. And we have established that these are more and less familiar in this population. We use the same material for selection that we used in the prior study. We present them with the information about the author and author credentials, as well as with the 3-sentence content that signals the relevance for this particular task that they are given. But now the selection gives access to longer documents. And they did the former study, they worked on paper. Now we have created a technological solution where they access a web-based application and do and work with the documents in that application. I will say a few more words about this study. In session 1, we collected individual difference data. As you can see here, topic knowledge, topic beliefs, topic interest, epistemic beliefs, and demographic data. And in the second session, we introduce them to the topics in this way. They are introduced to the topics on paper. And this is the introduction to the nuclear power plant issue. There's a similar introduction to the climate change, human-induced climate change issue, but I exemplify with the nuclear power plant. The topic is a between subject factor, so they are randomly assigned to one of the two topics in this study. We say that the safety of they read that the safety of nuclear power plants is a current and widely discussed topic. Nuclear power plants produce energy by splitting uranium. Uranium is a radioactive element, and in addition to energy, nuclear power plants produce radioactive waste. Today it's being discussed whether nuclear power plants are a safe method for producing energy, or whether the risk of accident and problems associated with radioactive waste indicate that nuclear power plants should be shut down. And those who are receiving the climate change topic get a similar introduction to the topic. And then both students receiving each of the topic are told that they will be writing a letter to the editor where they discuss the safety of nuclear power plants or human-induced climate change. When they log on, because they are going to log on a web address to enter the application, you will see a list referring to 20 web texts. This list shows information about the author and some of the content of each web text. From this list, select the web text you want to use when writing the letter to the editor. And from this list containing information about the author and a 3-sentence information about the content, in this list of 20 items, they vary according to content relevance, with 10 of the items more relevant and 10 of the items less relevant, and 10 of the items having high author expertise and 10 of the items having less author expertise. It's a 2x2 design where we have 5 items in each category: high relevance, high author expertise, low, etc. Before they go into this expectation, they also have 3 different instructions like this. One, they have randomly designed also to these instructions. So within each topic, they are in 3 different groups. One have what we call it first-hand evaluation, because it's directing them toward the content. They are told before selecting web text, be sure to evaluate whether the content is appropriate in completing the writing task. It's a content relevance instruction. And in the other condition, they are told before selecting web text, be sure to evaluate whether the source is trustworthy in completing the writing task. And then there's a control condition orientation, where they only get writing the letter to the editor instruction. And because it's extremely difficult to get students to pay attention to this type of instructions, they usually skip them or forget them or don't care about them. We have on a separate page this instruction that I show you here. Before you log on, we would like to make sure you noted the instruction. This is, I got this from Britt. On the next page, we therefore ask you to fill in the missing information from the instruction that you were given. If you can't recall the missing information, please refer back to the page where the instruction is written. And those who, for instance, got this, the appropriateness of the content, we make sure that everyone has filled in the missing words before they are allowed to enter the. So we, in a way, force them to pay attention to it. They may forget it, but we are constantly reminding about, remember also the instruction that you got. Then we enter the application. And they see this list like this of 20 items on a page. This is, and then they select the items they want to use for writing the letter to the editor by ticking boxes next to the items. Each item consists of author information and information about the three sentence information about the content. For instance, on the first, above the first thick liner, it says Professor Geir Johnsen, the Faculty for Natural Science, University of Agder. And then several accidents has occurred at nuclear power plants. The largest accident happened in Chernobyl in Ukraine in 1986. Several hundred people died. This would be a high author, high content relevance item. When they have selected as many as they want, they tick a submit button, and they will only have those items available that they have selected. The others will not be available anymore, and they are taken to a new page where only the selected items are visible, and this is such a page. And on this page they get the instruction. You will now be writing the letter to the editor where you discuss the safety of nuclear power plants or human-induced climate change. The list below shows the web text that you have selected. By clicking on them, you will get access to expanded texts. And by clicking on each of those items, they see a longer text consisting of about 150 words for each text. We want you to read these web texts and use information from them when writing the letter to the editor. You can read the web text in any order, and you may go back and forth between the web text and the letter you are writing. Click the Show Letter to the Editor button to write the letter to the editor. They are not writing at the same page, they are going to another page to write the essay, but they can go back and forth and access the text as much as they want. We have deactivated the copy and paste function, so they cannot copy and paste, because we were thinking that because they didn't do that in the study that they did in Northern Illinois, and a lot of students just copy and paste use this function. So we are now analyzing this data, and actually we have analyzed the data, but I'm not able to summarize the data here. I'm writing up the paper here now, but we have actually drafted the results section. We analyze for each topic separately with a 3x2x2 mixed model ANOVA. We have these three instructional conditions: orientation towards content relevance, towards source trustworthiness, and control as a between subjects factor. And then we have content relevance and author expertise as within subject factors. And we are also analyzing processing data in terms of reading times, how much time they spend reading each type of documents. I mean the 4 categories of documents. Do they mainly concentrate on high relevance, high author documents, or how do they balance these different types of criteria when they are processing the documents? And also we have analyzed all the written products from these 200 students, and we have traced the information units that they include in the letters to the editors to the different documents. So we can see whether they draw differently on the 4 categories of items that they have selected. So we are not only looking into selection of documents, but also processing and use of documents in these different categories, and also to see whether this is moderated by the different instructions that they get in addition to the letter to the editor task instruction. Like I can say that I can say about this results very briefly that we essentially replicate the selection data from the former study. That we can see a difference between the topic familiarity with respect to topic familiarity, that the students pay much more attention to author expertise when the topic is less familiar. And on this source trustworthiness orientation only works with a topic that is less familiar, because this is a much more salient aspect of the document with a less familiar topic, it seems like. I think I have to leave it there, but this will be
But I have a brief question. How will you manage the fact that in your processing data, the students have already made a selection of document types? So you may have students that mostly selected one document type and not the other three. So how are you going to compare this?
That is true, but still we can see that some students selected, for instance, some less relevant items together with some relevant items. Will they still use and process those less relevant items? We think that is an interesting question. Or will they, upon further reflection, see that this is not really a relevant document, I have not selected the relevant documents, or I won't spend any time on it, I will read it quickly or maybe skip it altogether, and I will then concentrate and only process and use information from the relevant documents that I was choosing. And I think we can see that even when students select some documents that are not relevant or also maybe less credible, they very seldom use those documents or process them to any large extent when they are going to write their essay. So there's some difference between. So I think that the findings from the selection data are even more pronounced when we look at the processing and writing task data. But I have not cannot tell you in detail about the results now. I would just say that if I have, or is time out, Javi?
No.
Because I would say also that a third goal is to further address the question of how students' acquisition and application of more sophisticated source evidence strategies can be effectively and efficiently promoted. And we are launching a large intervention study now this fall. We are starting to work with the school, and we are doing professional development with the teachers who are going to implement this intervention in a 10-week intervention in a high school close to the where we have. So we will do professional development with the teachers, and the teacher will implement this intervention in a 10-week intervention, and we will also have collect implementation data and also the long-term follow-up data from this intervention, because most of the intervention work has been very, very brief interventions where the researchers just has come in and done maybe a 2-session or intervention and then left the building, and no one knows what's happened the week after the researchers left. So to really advance this field, I think we have to do longer term interventions, and we also have to check whether this transfer to other tasks and the training tasks, and also look into collect follow-up data. So this is the main. I think if I had to stop there, Javi, I just click on this so that those who are seeing the PowerPoint, they can just read those 2 last slides, because I asked him this, okay, what's the point of all this? And they who want to know what was the point of all this, They can just read this slide together with this slide, and I don't, I don't have to tell them.
Okay.
So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivar.